And then uh, it's rewritten with a T from the earlier time, even though the T has become silent.
Right.
Other things that have happened in that very word, we have palatalization.
Yep.
That means ska has become sh.
This happens as well. I mean, this is fascinating. This happens exactly the same way. Classical Latin, the SC was a sk, like in Scipio Africanus, but then that becomes Scipio, not only in Italy, in Italian, but also in the Italianate pronunciation of Latin, aka ecclesiastical Latin, probably something that happened, was already a thing in the Middle Ages, probably was already a thing, started to become a thing in the late antiquity. That's discussable, debatable, I imagine. But yeah, we can pinpoint it.
We have some related changes too, like g becoming y and k becoming h.
Huh.
These palatalizations happen before front vowels, that is e, I, well, in a pronunciation sense, e, a, e, u, and also the consonant j.
For
So
those who didn't notice, he actually now pronounced two different varieties, qualities of a sound. One was closed, e, and one was open, e versus e.
a Viking would have to get used to saying not gester, but jest, not skip, but sheep. And then we also have the quantity reformation. So in Old Norse, we have various vowels that are written with an acute accent above them in our classical standard or in modern Icelandic, and then some that aren't. The ones that have that acute accent above them are held longer.
Yeah.
So for example, driva, to drive, has a longer E sound than drivin, driven.
Interesting. Another point of connection with Latin. In Italian, we do have a little bit, although then again, we don't look at it as vowel length, but we mostly look at it as accented syllables, and then naturally accented syllables tend to be pronounced longer. If you look at the word to love, amare, it's clearly that the first a is shorter than the second. So there is a quantity variance there, or variable rather than a quality. Amare, amare. Now I don't have to extend it to infinity. I don't have to say amare, that's a bit too much, but amare already gives the second a length differentiation. But we usually don't think of it that way. Instead, in classical Latin and similarly in ecclesiastical Latin, there is phonemic vowel length. So not only there is a difference in the way vowels were supposed to be pronounced, long or short, and this happens to every vowel in the register. So basically you realistically have now 10 vowels. You have a versus a, e versus e. Whether it's closed or open probably depends, and there is regional variation. I would say go for a true mid and you'll be okay. Then you have e versus e. I do not believe that it's versus e, by the way, but that's an item of debate that we can discuss with a dedicated video. I do think it's E versus E rather than versus E, because is a Germanic sound, and I do not believe it was present in classical Latin. There is O versus O, once again, true mid, and U versus U. Another point of discussion that I have sometimes with Anglophones who try to do versus U, I think it's U versus U, and it's not a quality difference, it's only a quantity difference. Regardless, it's phonemic, because in Latin, if you pronounce the same word with a long or a short vowel, you will have a difference in the meaning. So it's semantic, very complex.
In modern Icelandic, these have just different quantitative sounds.
Yep.
Driva, to drive, driven, like the short I in English, driven.
Yeah, I was going to say.
In modern Norwegian, something kind of similar has happened, but instead of being based on whether it was long or short in Old Norse and getting a different vowel quality based on that, we have a different vowel quality often, but also still a length difference. But the length difference is no longer conditioned by whether it was long or short in Old Norse. It's conditioned by whether it's followed by two consonants in modern Norwegian or not. So for example, ship, having a short I in Old Norse, that doesn't matter. What matters is that it's followed by only one consonant in modern Norwegian, so the vowel is long.
I
She.
see.
Whereas in a verb like kjenna, to know, the vowel is short. It was short in Old Norse too, but what conditions it to be short in modern Norwegian is how many consonants follow it, two in this case instead of one or none. A Viking would probably struggle with this. I know that as someone who learned Old Norse before I learned any modern Scandinavian languages, that this quantity quality reorganization of the vowels is one of the hardest things to learn. It's very, very different from anything that you do in Old Norse.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So he basically went the path of the Viking. So he's actually the perfect person to discuss this, not only because he's got the academic knowledge to back up everything, give us all the discussion in a very in-depth way, but also because he actually learned it that way. First he learned Old Norse, and then he picked up modern either Scandinavian or maybe Nordic, since I mean Icelandic technically is not a Scandinavian language. It has Scandinavian roots, but it's a Nordic language, the way I understand it. If I'm wrong, professor, if you see this, do correct me, but the way I understand it is that